course, we're very excited here covering this Diamondbacks team with the changes that they've made this offseason, the additions that they've made. So we were just curious as to your thoughts on where they stand right now in the National League. We had an interesting kind of PECOTA projections that kind of said the Diamondbacks could be the fourth best team in the National League potentially.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. I think I think they are a better team now than the one that went to the World Series, at least in terms of overall talent. Now, does that mean they're going to get back there again? I mean, I think what we saw in the postseason last year and what happened with them is a pretty good indicator that, the postseason's a crapshoot and you don't really know what's going to happen. But you want to create as much depth and as many possibilities for you to have success as possible. And I think they're a better roster right now. I mean, I think one of the more unheralded signings of the winter was Eduardo Rodriguez. He's really going to stabilize that rotation. He's a very good pitcher. I think they've addressed third base significantly with the trade for Eugenio Suarez. Bringing back Gurriel was a big deal. Adding Peterson to the mix, the DH slot is going to prove, I think, a really strong move against right-handed pitching in particular, and it's a pretty right-handed division on the mound right now. So I like what they've done. I wish they were adding a little bit to the bullpen. But sure. Other than that, I think that's where they're at right now is pretty positive.
Mike, there was just a report from Mark Feinstein that came out within the last hour or so that the Diamondbacks are maybe looking at adding another right-handed hitter to pair with Jock Peterson at DH. Tommy Pham was mentioned as one of the names. Of course, that would be the narratives there would be it'd really be something if that happened. How urgent of a need do you think that is for the Diamondbacks to obviously Jock Peterson, as you mentioned, an asset against righties, a little bit less so against lefties?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be nice to have. Well, first of all, are we talking about 2 fantasy football leagues then in the clubhouse? Is that what's going to have to happen? We're going to do this every
I think
week?
we have to be, right?
2, if it happens, do we run the risk of Montillo running naked through my neighborhood because he's been campaigning for Pham to come back all winter?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll make a special trip over to your neighborhood for sure. It's just jokes, Mike. The jokes. There's so many jokes.
There's so many.
Season.
Yeah, I mean. I really think it would slap the taste out of the rest of the division's mouth. No, listen. I say that
you did it. You said the thing.
I love Tommy Pham. I'm a huge Tommy Pham guy and always have been. And I think we talked about it even when they acquired him last summer. And I can't remember if it was on this or offline. The dude is just an absolute pro. He prepares the right way. He's a tremendous teammate.
Yeah.
He takes care of young players. Just having that guy in the mix is really good. And I think the one thing that Tommy's been faced with this winter is he wants to play. And unless the Diamondbacks are going to move another outfielder, I don't know how much regular playing time there is for him or any of the other names that were mentioned.
Yeah.
So, the other 2 names that came up were Adam Duvall, who hits lefties well, has real power, kind of a low on base guy, but is a really good defensive outfielder and fits that what the Diamondbacks like in terms of having a defender. And Randall Grichuk, who's a lefty masher who doesn't walk and probably swings and misses too much, but if you're limiting him against left-handers and playing on the corners, he's got a lot of value and he can run. So I think those 3 names make sense if you're trying to build out a deeper roster. It makes me wonder if they did do something like that, if they have something else brewing to try and address the bullpen via trade with some of what they still have in terms of 40-man outfield depth.
Yeah.
That's kind of where my head went to with some of that.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of improving the overall roster, I think it'd be a great move. I don't think you can have enough good offensive players. And right now they have a pretty good offense, and adding one of those righties to the mix would make them that much more potent. I mean, I think all 3 of them have great qualities. If the numbers were all equal and I could choose one of the 3, I would choose Pham for a lot of the intangible reasons. But I don't think you can go wrong with Duvall either. And if you're putting Grichuk in the right role, I think he is. I think he can be a real nice role player for you too.
I love the addition of Pham last year. I thought that when he came to this team, there was just some there was something about him that kind of it felt like he toughened the team up a little bit, right? And I mean, again, he's a veteran that's been around, and it feels like sometimes the Diamondbacks were a team that kind of needed a little bit of an edge. It felt like adding him there late, along with the additions to the bullpen, obviously, which were probably the bigger key, was a big thing that kind of drove them there in the playoffs. But without Tommy Pham being added to this team, or without any further moves being done, we were kind of surprised to see that the Diamondbacks were still in the market for a right-handed bat. What are your thoughts on what they've done this offseason overall? Like, do you think that they accomplished essentially the goal that they were looking to go out there and accomplish?
Yeah, I feel like again, the bullpen is the one spot that really hasn't been touched as much as I thought it might be. I thought there might be another reliever. It wasn't the best fit in terms of relief markets. Right. At least at the high end for them. But there always could be trades that they proved last year can be addressed during the season and fixed as well. I mean, I think, I go back to talking to the front office about this back in 2017 when I was working there. And, they were quick to point out when this group was in Boston's front office in 2013, they were on like their third or fourth closer at the end of the year when Koji Uehara took over. So, I mean, bullpens evolve over the course of a season. So I guess I'm a little less concerned about that. But I think they've addressed a lot of what they need. I mean, I think the other part in terms of the external additions that they've made is that they're really quality clubhouse guys. I mean, Peterson has a great reputation as a teammate. Yeah. Eugenio Suarez is the king of good vibes only. I know Scott Service loved him in Seattle, and his teammates loved him there. And he's just he's a really fun, good player to have around. And Eduardo Rodriguez is just a really good person, I think, and at least in my dealings with him. And so I think they have done a good job of identifying not just talented players, but good players that are professional in their preparation, that have good makeup. And I think, Jock brings a different edge than Tommy Pham does, but that accomplishes the same thing, right? So one of the things I always like to talk about is everybody wants to win, right? You hear this, well, this guy wants to win. Yeah, everybody wants to win, but not everybody wants to compete. And that's, I think, the thing that makes guys like Peterson and Pham good on rosters, and why so many of their teams make the postseason or make postseason runs is because they love the competition. And so I think that's a real benefit. I think that's a real big addition, but with Peterson in that regard, not to mention he crushes righties, and in a division that's going to be pretty right-handed, like that should be looked at as being significant.
Mike, I know you're big on prospects in general. Jordan Lawler, what are your expectations for him in 2024? Obviously, the talent is tremendous. He struggled quite a bit in his first taste of the majors last year. Maybe he got that opportunity a little bit before he was ready for it. What are you expecting from him in 2024?
What's so funny is that I heard in spring training last year from D-backs personnel that they felt like his bat was so far ahead of his glove that they were kind of concerned about that, right? That it was going to force the issue. And I think what we saw, and what in talking to multiple scouts in the organization about him, what they felt like was that the defense just doesn't look the way it's supposed to, but he makes all the plays. So it's like weird arm strokes and maybe playing on the run a little bit. And, we heard these same things about Troy Tulowitzki, right? And Tulo was a really good defender. That's not to say that Jordan Lawler's, heck, if Jordan has Troy Tulowitzki's career, I think everybody would sign up for it. But that same kind of, those criticisms sometimes come around with defensive players who are good at it, but don't necessarily look the part. It was clear that he needed more repetition against major league quality pitching last year, but there wasn't really going to be that opportunity for it with them in a pennant race. And that, I think, was, I think that in the end isn't a big surprise. If you hoped that he was going to come up and provide a boost like what Xander Bogaerts did for that Red Sox team in 2013, I think that's something you're hoping for, but not every player can do that. And I think the gap between AAA and the big leagues is far more significant now than it was 10 plus years ago. So there were adjustments that need to be made. The question is, when do they want those adjustments to take place? Is it best served for him to go to Reno early in the season, rake, and then come up and deal with the 100 or so plate appearances of him trying to get his feet wet at the big league level, knowing that he's had already a little taste of it? Is it better to do that from opening day and slide Geraldo Perdomo into more of a super utility role, which I think he'd thrive in? I mean, like, make no mistake, Perdomo is a really important guy in that clubhouse, and I think that they view him as having a significant role, but Lawler's a shortstop, and that's where he's going to play. Yeah. And that I think, those are ideal world situations. The reality of it is there's probably going to be an injury to someone at some point that forces their hand on that. And that's what will probably bring Lawler to the big leagues to stay when that happens. But I think he's got a chance to be an impactful offensive player at one of the best defensive positions, or the most important defensive positions on the field.
Well, last year they had the ability to kind of plug him in over there at third base due to the fact that they didn't have a true solution at third base. But now with Gino being added, it does feel like they had a guy that played 162 games last season. So that, which will never happen in a Torey Lovullo lineup, but they have their everyday regular third baseman. So it feels a bit there like Lawler, that kind of limits him to either a backup role or being called up when. No,
Lawler's not going to back up anywhere.
Right.
If
that's
Lawler's
what I'm saying.
on the team, he's playing every day.
Right.
Perdomo would be the backup and Lawler would be the starter. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts about Eugenio Suarez, by the way? We're talking about the PECOTA projections kind of hating him a little bit next year. They do not have him projected to have a very good season. But what are your thoughts on how he solves that problem at third base for them and what he's possibly going to be for this team?
Well, you don't have to clear a very high bar to be better than the third base production they got a year ago. I mean, I think if you're comparing it year over year, he's going to be an improvement. Listen, I mean, do you want to focus on the things that Suarez does well, or do you want to focus on the things that are going to be frustrating at times? Because the things that he does well is he hits the ball out of the ballpark and he's a solid average defender at third base. Like, those are really good qualities to have. The biggest flaw against him is that he's going to strike out and he's starting to age a little bit. He's moving from a difficult environment for right-handed pull hitters to a slightly less difficult environment for right-handed pull hitters. Chase Field isn't your older brother's Chase Field in the pre-Humidor days. But I think he certainly is going to provide power. He's not going to be counted on to be necessarily that cleanup hitter. I'm not sure exactly how Torey's looking at his lineup now, but I would think that he probably hits in the 5th or the 6th spot. And that probably takes a little bit of pressure off him too. He's got a good idea of what to do with men on base. He's going to be an absolute professional in the way that he goes about his business. Now, he's going to be a good influence on the other players in the clubhouse, especially the young guys, which I think is important. He's the fun uncle, right? So you need to have guys like that around, and that's Gino. The projections, remember, those are like weighted mean projections, and I think Zips had him right around a league average performer, right? They had him right around 2 WAR, which is about what he did last year. And if you're able to get that out of him and say, weighted runs created plus around 100 or maybe a tick above, that's a huge upgrade over what they had last year, and that's a pretty solid player overall. So I think there are things that will frustrate at times, but for the most part it's going to be a lot of dongs and a lot of laughs in the dugout with him.
Mike, we did our highly anticipated tier rankings of the various Cactus League ballparks the other day on the show. We had some fun with that. I think we all know Salt River Fields is at the top. Sloan Park is certainly up there as well. I'm curious for you, are there, maybe it's not, I don't know. Are there ballparks for you that are maybe overrated, underrated? Do you have opinions on these kinds of things?
Yeah, I think the best thing I can say about Sloan Park is almost all the seats are in the shade. Like, that's the part that I think is really good.
Which is big. I think that's big around here.
There are some things about Sloan Park that I really don't like the fact that the home clubhouse is about a quarter of a mile from the field and that they have to walk across every day. I hate that so much. Like, I don't think the players like it either, but it was done to kind of spare expense. I think there's, it's fine. It's newish. It's fine. It looks like new construction. It does its job, but it's a comfortable place to watch a game. I think more than anything from a fan standpoint, like, the shade should not be discounted. I mean, it's one of, like if your assignment during the AFL, which is when I spend most of the time in seats in these places during the fall league, is between going to Sloan Park or to go to Camelback Ranch, I'm going to choose Sloan Park every day and twice on Sundays because I don't want skin cancer. And that's the big problem at Camelback Ranch is it's a beautiful facility, but everything is in the sun, right? Like it's really tough. Yeah. I'll tell you what, the one that I think is really underrated. Like I love Scottsdale Stadium. It's old school. I like, Tempe Diablo's a little bit run down. I know they're going to try and make some improvements to it, but I love the buttes in the background. I think the one that's underrated is Maryville. I think that's a great ballpark to see a game. It generally is pretty inexpensive to go to as well. It's really the most centrally located of any of the facilities. I really like Maryville. I love going to games there. So that's the one that I would say is underrated. And then the ones that are at the top of the list, you're right. I mean, Salt River is one for me. Scottsdale Stadium is probably number 2. I really like the Peoria Sports Complex too. I would put that up there on the list. I
Derek
think, even though it's
stand it. Derek lives right by it, and he can't stand it.
It is the closest one to me, and I do not. I'm not a fan.
Why?
But
why?
Mostly, I don't feel like when you go to it that they have done enough to keep up with how the spring training ballparks have changed. Like there is a way to keep the old school feel to it, like you're talking about with Scottsdale, and still have some amenities, still have some vendors out there. Like the food choices aren't great. There's just not a lot. Like I don't know. I do enjoy the environments in some of the other ballparks, especially Scottsdale. I really like the environment, and that's all Giants fans, right? Like when you go to a game there, but that's what I think is incredible is I think like it's rare at some of the spring training games that you go to that the crowd is actually really into the game and they're watching it and they are cheering even in the 6th and 7th innings and such. And like the only place I feel like I've ever seen that is at Scottsdale. So I mean, it's a fun environment to be a part of. I take all that into consideration.
Scottsdale is like the last real, like this is what old spring training felt like. I mean, even Hohokam doesn't have quite that feel anymore to it, even though I do love the big steps up like they have at that in Tempe Diablo, but because they've poured a fair amount of money into Scottsdale. I think those criticisms of Peoria are fair. I don't tend to eat at the ballpark very often, so I guess I'm not in line on the concessions.
That's all I go there for.
I find it I'm kidding. I think from a comfort standpoint, I find it to be a really comfortable place to watch a game with good sight lines, and there's a good combination of seats with backs and seat without. So you can move around. But yeah, Scottsdale Stadium is like, if you want to tell people, like it's the, I don't know that you can put a Wrigley or Fenway on it necessarily, but it is definitely the most venerable of the Arizona spring training locations.
We actually brought you on here for a very specific reason, Mike. We really we were beating around the bush. We just have one question to ask you, and that is, what did you do to the baseball Barbiecast? Huh? What did you? My guys just disappeared.
It was thriving. Suddenly, Mike Ferrin steps in and does this cool prospect Barbiecast thing with them on Wednesdays, and then all of a sudden it disappears. Mike, what happened? What did you do?
I've been at Sirius for 17 years. Let's just say I have a lot of pull.
We'll learn not to mess with you. Sorry. We apologize for any jokes we made.
So you guys know that I'm wearing my Barbiecast hat. You made.
Oh, yeah. We see that.
So Jake and Jordan, I have literally. It's a real positive development for them, and that I'm most excited about because they're tremendous advocates for the game. They go about it in such different ways. Jake is a lovable goof, but he also played at a high enough level that he can have conversations with players that not a lot of other reporters can.
Right. Sure.
And Jordan is incredibly studious, and so I think where they're going to go next, my hope is that they're big hits and that they continue to that they continue to raise their profile, because I think they're important for baseball because of the way they love it. They're not afraid to ignore the warts.
Right.
But they don't focus on the warts. You know what I mean? And that I really appreciate.
Yeah. We're huge fans of theirs. We're huge fans of yours. But if they come up missing, we're going to testify against you in court. I'm just putting that out there right now.
I
Mike,
was never in Indiana.
Mike, we appreciate you stopping by, man. Thank you so much for your knowledge and your time.
My pleasure, boys. We'll see you soon.